Welcome back. Well, of course, today is that big day, midnight. GST comes into effect. It's being called the biggest tax reform ever in India. Some other people are slightly more concerned and they're saying it's going to lead to a lot of chaos, and which is why we are talking to some of the top economic thinkers and policy experts, including those who've been very closely associated with the government in helping bring GST into effect. And someone who's joining us now, Mr. Shaktikanta Das. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be talking to you, sir, because you just retired, of course, as Economic Affairs Secretary, but you've also been Revenue Secretary and are one of the people who's been very closely involved in all the steps that have been happening behind the scene to bring GST to bear. So can I start off by asking you, are you, at your heart of hearts, sir, somewhat surprised that we've actually been able to keep to the deadline of 1st of July? We are actually going ahead with this deadline, no extension, no delay?
No, absolutely not. In fact, over the last 6 to 7 months when I was in the government, we have been taking the position that GST shall be implemented from 1st of July, and I have myself said so also, and we made that statement on the basis of the kind of progress that was made by the GST Council, by the Revenue Department, the CBEC at the center, and by the state VAT departments. The way the GSTN was shaping up, the way the entire action around GST was moving, we were quite confident that it will be effective. It will be effective from 1st July.
But the only reasons to delay it would have been A, if the government was not ready, B, if the IT infrastructure was not ready, and C, if traders and people out there have not fully become au fait with what they need to do. And there are some people who are still saying that we don't know the technology, we're not computer literate, we're not quite able to sort it out. The government and the IT side, to your mind, are you fairly confident that that's absolutely ready? All the state governments and the IT infrastructure ready to take it, even if some of the traders and others are not?
You see, over the last 6 to 8 months, to the credit of the authorities in the central and the state governments, they have conducted number of outreach programs. There have been number of awareness programs. Various traders, bodies, industries, associations, they have also conducted outreach programs. And the various, the draft legislation, in fact, the draft law has been in the public domain for a fairly long time. And so therefore, I think preparation is quite adequate. Naturally, when you are making such a huge shift from an existing tax system to a new one under a new constitutional framework, and under a new sort of regime where both center and states will have a single indirect taxation, naturally it is quite legitimate that some traders would have some kind of apprehension in their mind. But I am quite sure that as we go by, things will get resolved. And also, incidentally, in terms of preparedness, I mean, one of the points which I have heard is that non-availability of the internet facility or connectivity. And I am happy to note that the Revenue Department has now said that even the various filling up of the forms and the registration process, all are now enabled through the mobile phones.
Right. Of course, I've been talking to some people at the Finance Ministry, including this morning, and they were somewhat jokingly saying that no matter when the deadline would have been, many of us, we as Indians like to do things at the last minute. So there'll be people who would have struggled with the deadline, even if we fix the deadline at 2020 or 2025, which I guess is also true to some extent. But there are genuine concerns in some people's minds that, we haven't fully understood it. It's a bit more, it's quite a complicated system. How would you answer that?
You see, I would feel that the GST is far simpler compared to the existing tax structure. Please remember that today, with regard to indirect taxes, we have the central excise laws, we have the service tax laws, and at the state level, you have not only the VAT, which is under a separate legislation of the state, every state has also its entertainment tax law, they have their luxury tax law, then there is an entry tax law. So there is a plethora, there is a multiplicity of taxes at the state level. And similarly in the center, it is both the service tax and the excise duty. They are two different taxes. Now all these plethora of taxes, multiplicity of taxes, are becoming a single tax, and the traders, the dealers, Now, earlier what was happening, the same registered trader or the same manufacturer, let us say, had to file a excise return, service tax return, luxury tax return if it applied to him, a VAT return. There was a multiplicity of tax returns which he had to file.
Yeah.
Today it is a single tax. Now, somebody may say that there are multiple forms. Now, I would beg to differ, and I would like to place for consideration of your viewers that I think there are totally about 2 or 3 forms which the dealers are expected to file every month. So, basically we are looking at 3 forms which are repeated every month. Now, unless you file that return on a monthly basis, you do not get the input tax credit. That will be against the interest of the traders, against the interest of the manufacturers.
Right. Now, just a few months back, you serve at the very center of, same sort of arguments which were often being made was short-term pain, long-term gain, which is, of course, after demonetization. And you, we will all remember, were right there at the center of it, dealing with how to get that thing done. What is the sort of dislocation or disruption that you would expect with GST as compared to what we experienced just a few months back? Of course, that was far more of a surprise. This has been known, the deadline has been clear, the rules have been out for a long period of time. So they can't entirely be compared as events, but in terms of their impact, especially the short-term impact, how would you see the impact of GST compared to demonetization?
You see, yes. Now, the first thing, since you have referred to demonetization, I have to mention that the so-called short-term pain was indeed a very, very short-term difficulty which was experienced in certain parts of the country and certain class of citizens. So, I mean, the impact should not be should not be exaggerated beyond a proportion, and what I am saying, I really sincerely and genuinely believe in that. Now, the difference between demonetization and GST is that the demonetization affected almost every individual who had every individual in the country, whether he is an Indian citizen or a foreign citizen, it affected everybody. GST is something which affects directly about 70 lakh registered traders, about 70 lakh so far. So, therefore, the problems are far more less. And as you have rightly pointed out, it has been preceded by several months of preparation. So, basically the main advantage of GST is that the compliances will be much easier. It is a much simpler tax, it is much more transparent, and it makes the task of compliance much easier for the traders and for the dealers.
Where GST would affect everybody, you're right that the direct consequences of GST will be felt by the traders and by companies, not so much by individuals. Where it affects everybody is obviously on its impact on prices. And there are some who have been feeling that, maybe the rates could have been lower. And so that, I guess, has been a debate that's been on at the GST Council. Could we have had fewer rates than the 7 that we are ending up with? And B, could the rates themselves have been a little lower while still leaving them as revenue neutral, especially because you may well have more compliance. A lot more people may actually be coming into the tax net now. So could the rates have been lower?
You see, the buoyancy factor is something which the time alone will tell how much of buoyancy we will expect out of introduction of the GST. But yes, definitely it will be tax buoyant. And with regard to the impact on prices, let me say that let us not take a one-sided view of the situation. A one-sided view of the situation will be to look at those goods or services where the tax rates are being increased. Now, there are large number of goods and services, goods particularly, where the tax rates are being reduced compared to their current levels. Now, we are only looking with regard to those items, the taxes, the goods and services where the tax rates are marginally being increased. We are only looking at the fact that the rate is being increased by, let's say, 2% or 3%, and we are completely ignoring the other side of the story, which is the availability of the input credit, the input tax credit, and the avoidance of tax on tax. So, therefore, a tax already paid will be, that credit, the tax credit will be available. So, therefore, I would expect that going forward, wherever there is a tax increase in rate, I think it will get substantially moderated by the fact that the input tax credit would be available.
So you're essentially saying because the cascading of taxes that's sometimes called, that at every level of the value added chain people are paying tax, and then you're paying tax on tax and so on and so forth, because that's being done away, long term you think that prices will be stabilized or will in fact come down. Would that be your overall expectation from GST for a vast majority of products and a vast majority of people?
No, my expectation is that, having worked in this sector for a fairly long time, and my expectation is that even in the medium term, I think it will stabilize, and the kind of increase which in prices which some people are apprehending, I would expect that it will not happen. It is possible. I mean, going forward, we'll have to see how it plays out, how the input tax credit is available, how much of it is being passed on to the ultimate consumer. So all that will play out in the next 2 to 3 months. But I think in the next 2 to 3 months, there could be some implementation issues and challenges. But even in the medium term, let us say, in about a year or two, I think things should stabilize, and the positive effect for the economy, so far as GST is concerned, I think the positive impact will be visible. And may I, if add one more point, I think we have taken far too long to implement GST in our country. If India has to grow at 9%, which will provide adequate job to our youngsters, if India has to remain globally competitive, if our domestic business and industry has to become more competitive, I think we cannot afford any more delay in GST, and sooner the better.
Luckily, that's now a matter of fact that tonight is the night when it is happening. But one last question to you, sir. As you've been Revenue Secretary and you've looked at, I'm sure, repeatedly and torn your hair out at the problem of how do we get more people into the tax net. And that, of course, with the formalization of the economy, with the fact that there are fewer places for people to hide now to get input tax credit, for example, you're going to have to file who all your suppliers are, so the suppliers can't hide anymore. So do you think that one of the big long-term advantages will be people are coming into the tax net now, and as a result of that, maybe we can aim a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, the rates will also come down, tax rates will come down because a lot more people are paying tax now and are in the tax net?
I'm inclined to agree with you that going forward, there is very good scope for reduction of the tax slabs as well as for moderation of rates. There is very good possibility for that going forward, maybe not immediately, but maybe in a matter of, let's say, 2 to 3 years. I think going forward it will happen. And also, let me add as a last word that I think GST together with demonetization have ensured and will ensure that the long shadow of the so-called parallel economy in our country will get eliminated, and the real economy will begin to show itself more, and we will experience growth in the real economy.
All right, Mr. Shaktikanta, thank you so much for joining us with that rather positive view of what is going to happen, and we'll of course have to see how much short-term disruption we actually have in the next month or two. But we will keep our eyes on what you said about a eventual moderation, hopefully, of tax rates, of the rates of GST, and also of inflation and price points. Thank you so much, sir, for having joined us. Thank you.